Not all of our minisodes need to be from listeners. In fact, places or lesser-known cases can sometimes take us to dark realms. Hello everyone and welcome back to another installment of Dark Realms. Now, as you know by now, we've started to cast the net out when we're looking at these dark realms. No longer are we just confined to looking at places, we're looking at people, situations, experiences, and anything else that may fall under the gamut of a dark realm. Now, the realm we will be taking a peek at today is something that we often associate with many hundreds of years ago, and with trials and with burnings, etc. I'm talking about witchcraft, and it's often something that we do resign to history, and I mean as in Middle Ages, etc. But not today. Today we're going to take a look at a case of witchcraft that included legal proceedings and consequences and changed the law. But before we do, a quick shout out that we are taking submissions for our next season. You can find the link in the show notes or go direct to thedarkparanormal.com/submit my experience. And of course, within the show notes is the link to our Patreon, where we're giving a free week trial at our highest tier, so you can gain access to early ad-free episodes and also to the Patreon-only show Dark Bites. That airs every Sunday of the year. It's 30 minutes in length, and we take a look at some of the shorter experiences that we receive. Now, of course, that trial's only 7 days, and if you don't wish to remain a member, you cancel your membership. Now, I personally wouldn't. I think what that community has built is something phenomenal, and if I wasn't already the host, I would be a member. And we have just added our own group chat section within Patreon for our Patreons to discuss amongst themselves their theories, their ideas, and also just to get to know each other in what I believe is the safest space for paranormal conversations on the internet. So either click the link in the show notes or go direct to patreon.com/thedarkparanormal. But right now, we're going to talk about witchcraft. So take some time for yourself, sit down, make a cup of tea, and listen whilst we talk about witchcraft, which of course took place many hundreds of years ago, but not today. Because we're only heading back to 1944 to talk about the last person to be imprisoned under the British Witchcraft Act of 1735. This Dark Realms is about none other than Helen Duncan. Now, I want you to hold two ideas in your mind at the same time, because this story only becomes truly unsettling when both are true. The first is human and ordinary. A country at war, families broken by telegrams, and people desperate for one last word from the dead that they will sit in the darkness to wait for it. The second is colder. The state does not always need to prove the supernatural is false. Sometimes it only needs to prove that someone claimed it. Today we're talking about Helen Duncan, often referred to as Britain's last witch, and linked in the public imagination to the last great witchcraft trial. But that label is slightly misleading, because the thing that sent her to prison was not cursing or devilry or any medieval image of witchcraft. It was an old law used against someone accused of pretending to do the impossible. So let's begin where her story begins for most people, in the séance room. Picture it. Low light, often red, curtains drawn, Helen Duncan seated behind them, calling upon spirit guides with comforting names, Peggy, Albert, figures meant to sound familiar, even safe. Then would come the thing that made her famous, ectoplasm. a pale substance said to emerge from her mouth or nose, becoming a kind of veil through which the dead would appear. And this is where the facts immediately begin to split. By the early 30s, critics and investigators, including some linked to mainstream spiritualist circles, were already claiming that Duncan's ectoplasm was not supernatural at all. They said it was made of ordinary materials such as cheesecloth, paper, egg white, things that could be hidden and produced in dim, dark conditions for dramatic effect. And yet, the fascination never fully went away. Objects linked to her séances survived in archives and exhibitions. Even disputed belief leaves traces. Even when people suspect deception, they preserve the evidence of it, almost as if they're reluctant to let the possibility die completely. If this were only a story about a medium, and whether she was genuine or fraudulent, it would still be intriguing. But it becomes far more mysterious and colder when the war entered the room. In wartime Britain, secrecy was of the utmost importance. Morale mattered. Information could be treated almost like a weapon. Loose lips sink ships was the motto. Rumours were not harmless if they spread too far or too fast. And that is why the Duncan story becomes something more than a question of séance theatre. Accounts repeatedly returned to Portsmouth in 1941. During a séance, Duncan was said to reveal the sinking of HMS Barham before the loss had been officially announced, and that detail is crucial. Barham had been sunk by the German submarine U-331 on the 25th of November 1941. The ship blew up and went down within minutes, and more than 800 men were killed. Now, imagine the atmosphere surrounding that event. Families may already have feared the worst. Some may even have known privately that loved ones were missing or dead. But the general public had not yet been formally told. This was wartime. Britain was carefully controlling information. Britain was at war. The management of grief was part of the management of morale. And then, within that atmosphere, a medium says the name of a ship to the wider public that is not known to have been lost. Whether Duncan learned this paranormally, socially, or through leakage, the effect on the authorities was the same. This is a problem. A later account adds an earlier example from May 1941, where Duncan allegedly announced the loss of another British warship at a séance in Edinburgh, again before the news had spread officially. Now, whether every detail can be verified to the same standard, the pattern is still clear. Wartime secrecy and séance revelation were overlapping in ways that the state found intolerable. This is the real trigger in the Duncan case. Not simply fraud, not simply spiritualism, but the fear that something said in the dark might outrun official truth. And by January 1944, that concern had hardened into action. Today's episode of The Dark Paranormal is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it. So your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Companies and affiliates' potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations. Police raided a séance in Portsmouth at the Master Temple Church of Spiritual Healing. Duncan and 3 others were arrested. At first, their handling of the case looked fairly ordinary. They were initially charged under the Vagrancy Act, a law often used in cases involving mediums and fortune tellers. That would have kept the matter on familiar ground, a minor case of fraud. But then the case took a darker and stranger turn. Instead of remaining a routine prosecution, it was pushed towards the Witchcraft Act of 1735, an archaic law whose very name guaranteed public fascination. Now, this did not mean that the authorities believed Helen Duncan was literally a witch. Quite the opposite. The logic of the act was to punish people for falsely claiming powers associated with witchcraft. Even so, the choice of that statute matters enormously, because the state could have used a more ordinary route. Instead, it decided to reach back into the past and revive a word loaded with fear, superstition, ridicule, and spectacle. The case was moved to London and tried at the Old Bailey rather than dealt with locally. That alone signalled that this was no longer being treated as a minor embarrassment. It was now worthy of the attention of a central criminal court during wartime. 2 details are especially important here. First, the law was interpreted broadly. In the appeal decision, the court held that conjuration under the Witchcraft Act did not only mean summoning evil spirits, pretending to call up the spirits of the dead to make them appear or communicate could also fall within it. Second, the prosecution did not need to prove that the supernatural was impossible. That is one of the most unnerving features about the whole case. The court was not there to settle whether spirits exist. It was there to decide whether Duncan and the others had conspired to pretend they did, and in doing so, delude or defraud vulnerable people. So the dead, in a strange sense, became legally irrelevant. Belief in the dead did not. The trial began on the 23rd of March 1944. On April 3rd, Helen Duncan was found guilty. She was sentenced to 9 months' imprisonment and served that time in Holloway Prison. Even if you believe every séance was a fabrication, there is still something chilling about that outcome. Not because fraud was punished, but because the machinery used to punish it came clothed in the language of witchcraft, in the middle of a modern war, under a government already anxious about secrecy and control. The case rose so high that Winston Churchill himself complained about it. He wrote to Herbert Morrison calling the proceedings obsolete tomfoolery, questioning why wartime courts were being burdened with a prosecution under such an ancient law. That phrase is often quoted because it captures the absurdity, but it does not remove the unease. Because even while senior politicians dismissed the case as foolish, a woman still went to prison under the shadow of a word dragged out from the 18th century. Duncan appealed. In June 1944, the Court of Criminal Appeal upheld the conviction, reaffirming the broad reading of the law and supporting the trial judge's decision to not allow an in-court demonstration of her supposed mediumistic powers. Again, the court did not want to enter the séance room. It only wanted to judge the claims made within it. After the conviction, the case became more powerful as a symbol than it had been as a trial. Helen Duncan came to stand at the intersection of several fears at once. Grief that wanted proof, a state that wanted control, and a legal system willing to repurpose the language of the past to solve a modern problem. Her case also became one of the clearest catalysts for legal change. In 1951, Parliament repealed the Witchcraft Act and replaced it instead with the Fraudulent Mediums Act. Again, a phrase which implies genuine mediums exist. The law moved away from the theatrical language of witchcraft and towards the more modern language of fraud. Even here, though, precision matters, because Helen Duncan is often described as the last person tried under the Witchcraft Act. Strictly speaking, that's not quite true. She was the last person imprisoned under it. Another medium, Jane Rebecca York, was convicted later in 1944, and she was fined, but not jailed. That distinction matters because this story has always been shaped by myth as much as record. Duncan became the figure because her case had the ingredients that remain unforgettable: grief, darkness, wartime secrecy, the dead speaking out of turn, and the state reaching back in history for a word powerful enough to make the public stir and even laugh. And decades later, Helen Duncan's name remains. Campaigns have called for a posthumous pardon. Archives still preserve the physical remnants associated with her séances. Her fascination lingers, half curiosity and half warning. So, what are we left with? If you believe in the paranormal, Helen Duncan may look like a persecuted medium who knew too much. If you do not, she may look like a fraud who strayed into sensitive wartime territory. But even if you strip away every spirit, every strand of ectoplasm, every claim of contact with the dead, something unsettling remains. What remains is a story about longing, about how deep grief makes people listen, how easily that longing can be manipulated, and how quickly a frightened society may decide that someone speaking in the dark has become too dangerous to continue. And perhaps that's why this case still feels cold. Because the most haunting possibility is not that the dead spoke. It's that the living was so frightened of rumour, of belief, of what might spread beyond official control, that they reached out for an ancient law and made it speak again. Personally, I think Helen Duncan was a woman of two halves. I think she had a genuine mediumistic ability, and I think she was also a showwoman. Do I believe in the ectoplasm? No. Do I believe she had some form of ability to contact dead sailors? Yes. For her to once say a ship has sank before anyone had knowledge would be a fluke. But to do it twice either means she's in with someone within the Navy, giving her or feeding her this information, which seems so unlikely that they weren't brought up in trial it's untrue, or that beyond the red dim lights and the ectoplasm showmanship, she was in contact with the dead as they freshly departed. Now, if you're the government of somebody who has that person in their country, you can't necessarily just swipe them off the streets and claim they're talking to the dead. But what you can do is defame them. You can make them a laughingstock. You can say it's all disinformation. This person is insane. We're even trying her under a witchcraft act. That's how ridiculous she is. And in doing so, you make everything that comes out of her mouth since a laughingstock too. As we stated, another medium was indeed arrested after Helen Duncan under the Witchcraft Act, but was let off with a fine. Maybe she wasn't giving away pieces of information that were not yet public knowledge that scared the government. scared them to a point they wanted her name to become associated with lies and laughter. Whatever the truth behind Helen Duncan, we will never know. But the fact the British government felt compelled to search for an act from the 1700s to kind of humiliate her speaks volumes, as does replacing that act with the fraudulent Medium Act. Because where there's black, there's white. Where there's fraud, there's truth. So what exactly does our law believe? If the act are anything to go by, speaking with the dead is something they don't seem to have ruled out completely. Thank you for joining me on this Dark Realms. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed looking into it, and I can't wait to speak to you all next time. Until then, stay safe and take care.